Welcome to the presentation of the results of my Information Learning Activity, or ILA. The intention of this ILA was to put an inquiry learning process into place where students have to independently find and use a variety of sources of information in order to learn about this topic. In this instance, the topic is the third stage of a unit of work entitled Bound for Botany Bay, which is essentially about the First Fleet and those convicts lucky enough to score passage on its inaugural journey. Our school has only just begun using the ACARA history curriculum this year, 2012, and this unit of work attempts to answer the question from the Year 4 focus area, why did Europeans settle in Australia? Included are appropriate excerpts from the Australian history curriculum documents to illustrate the basis for this unit of work. The historical knowledge, understandings and skills aligned with the Year 4 curriculum and their elaborations. I have a small class of only 18 students, one of which was not included in this study as he is a verified student with severe learning difficulties. The Year 4 students completed the first segment, which identified conditions in Britain at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, the justice system that existed at the time, and the problems of overcrowded prisons. Students accessed the list of convicts from the First Fleet database and chose one of them to focus all their journal and other writing tasks upon throughout the unit. The second segment focused on the ships of the First Fleet, Captain Arthur Phillip, conditions on board ship and the journey from Portsmouth to Sydney Cove. They had only limited information on the convicts, so any writing was a challenge, but it gave the students an opportunity to produce some very creative responses. The third section of this unit is where my ILA is situated. The overall area of study is the arrival of the First Fleet at Sydney Cove after vetoing Botany Bay as their landing site and the site of the new penal colony. It also looked at the possible reactions of the prisoners, marines, sailors, free settlers and their families to their new home. They were now thousands of miles away from family and friends. How did these early Australians survive and eventually thrive in their new home? The unit ran for 9 weeks, while the inquiry-based element, my ILA, continued over 3 weeks at the tail end. There was very little TL involvement in this section of the unit. The TL read Surviving Sydney Cove by Goldie Alexander each week and was able to clarify children's understandings of terminology and cultural differences as they proceeded through the story. Brunner's inquiry process, pictured here, provides a model for teachers to follow when planning and implementing inquiry-based activities in the classroom. Before beginning the inquiry using this process, I use KWL to get the students thinking about the topic. This fits with Brunner's ideology because pre-planning, brainstorming and questioning are essential elements of the planning stage of the inquiry. Then the inquiry process started. The benefits of a model such as the inquiry process is the ability of the learner to go forward and backward to each of the stages to either rethink or rework the inquiry. It also has the constant questions associated with each of the 4 sections that remind students what they are looking for and help to keep them on track for success. During the research process, students were asked to try established ways of finding information before any intervention occurred. Once they had reached the point of using everything they could think of, we brainstormed ways in which we could find the information we needed, and with some teacher assistance, they became familiar with a broader range of tools and their associated skills. 3 questionnaires based on those in the SLIM toolkit were modified to better reflect the unit of work associated with the ILA. The first questionnaire was administered at the beginning of the 3-week research project to identify prior knowledge and interest and provide a baseline for subsequent data collections. Each questionnaire began by asking participants to write down everything they knew about the topic. The second question ascertained their level of interest in the topic, and the third their self-assessment of how much they knew. Question 4 asked what the students found easy about doing research, and question 5 what they found difficult. These questions are standard in all 3 questionnaires. Questionnaire 2, which is administered midway through the study, additionally asks participants to identify how they feel about their research to this point, and questionnaire 3 is given at the end of the research project, providing the final assessment by learners of their involvement in the study, and includes an additional 2 questions. The first asks learners to identify what they have learned during the research project, and the final question again asks how they felt about their research during the study. On this next slide, you will see 2 examples of the first questionnaire which demonstrate sample responses from 2 different ends of the spectrum. Student O is very positive and confident of her knowledge of the topic and how well she will manage the inquiry, while student E is very negative and feels he lacks any understanding of the topic and will not be able to do anything. Positive steps in the next one from both students. These were consistent on the second questionnaire, although student O has gone from a great deal back to quite a bit for question 2, as she has begun to engage with the research project. Student E has taken the difficult step from feeling very limited at the beginning to now feeling a bit more able and willing to have a go. This was a huge positive for this particular child, although the optimism needs to be tempered by his response to question 6, as he indicated feeling frustrated with his research at this point. In the third and final questionnaire sampled from the class, both students have demonstrated positive progression through the academic, attitudinal and affective realms of the research project and its associated tasks. I spoke with these 2 students after reading their responses to see if they could articulate the experiences they had been through. Student O responded by restating her knowledge of the topic and how she could use all the research tools, but you had to be able to spell the words you were looking for to find them on the internet, she tells me. She enjoyed the process and the product, a journal article written by her convict and a newspaper report written about the arrival of the First Fleet and convicts to New South Wales in 1788. Student E, while he experienced a greater level of success than he had predicted, he still thought that if he had to do this again, he would find it difficult. Now, question 1, fact statements. As you can see on this slide, the study group has many facts to share. Some had little else besides factual statements. Some students showed no fact statements in the first questionnaire. These were students J, K and Q, who used explanation statements to explain their understandings prior to completing the unit. The number of responses varied, however most students only felt they needed to mention one thing and the question would be appropriately answered. This information was given to them by student N, who told his friends that as long as they put one answer in, they wouldn't be in trouble. The explanation statements graph shows a lot less responses at this level, with many only being able to offer these statement types by the third questionnaire. The increased complexity of their responses does indicate an increased knowledge of the topic and their ability to put the dot points together. There were no conclusion statements provided by these students unless I incorrectly coded the answers I had on the questionnaires. On the next slide, I have plotted the number of fact statements and explanation statements by each student who participated in this study to provide a better overview of their responses. As you can see in all but 2 of the results, the number of fact statements was equal to or more than the number of explanation statements made by students. In 2 cases, student K and student O, this result was reversed. These 2 students were highly interested in the topic and did a lot of work throughout. Now, question 2, the interest score. On this slide you can see many students identified a great deal or quite a bit as their level of interest. We did have 3 students say they had not much interest in the topic, and one child, student N, was not at all. The knowledge estimate of these students for question 3 showed an across-the-board positive result after the 3 questionnaires. All students either remained the same or improved the estimate of their knowledge about the topic. 6 students initially felt they knew not much about the topic, while the other students were more confident and optimistic. This second questionnaire identified 5 students who acknowledged they knew not much after being more confident in the first questionnaire. Obviously, they had begun to realise the depth of the information they needed for this purpose and felt they had come up short. N continued to identify not much as his knowledge level, and in the second questionnaire, nothing at all. The American Association of Librarians developed this information literacy standards for student learning. These have been used to identify both the areas students found easy and those they found difficult when doing research. The information was gathered using all 3 questionnaires and the responses to questions 4 and 5. Responses were linked with the different skills identified with research in this document, and a table once again shows what the students felt they knew how to do and what was difficult when trying to find the information they needed for this unit. The areas they seemed most comfortable with are using technology and finding books in the library. None of the students include their final products as a consideration at this point, and students were only allowed to use dot points with brief information when researching. Some students had become aware early in the study that they needed to work out which information was correct or suitable for the purpose. The area they identified as the most difficult was finding out which information was correct amongst the variety of responses and what was actually needed to answer the question. The hardest identified were finding and organising information and ensuring it was appropriate and correct. They also found developing the right questions to get the answers was difficult. Many students had answers that did not fit and had to be included in the other category. Some of these responses were remembering all of it, the library lady helped me, nothing was difficult, it's hard to do homework, an ESL child, spelling was hard, being hungry, background noise, and trying to find a real convict. Questionnaire 3, question 6, asked the students to identify what they'd learned while doing the research project and was administered at the end of the unit when all assessments had been completed. Overall, it reflected that students felt more comfortable using technology and other avenues for finding information, but the ability to organise and critically assess the information was a skill that eluded them. The affective realm, which is dealt with in question 6, questionnaire 2, and question 7, questionnaire 3, showed a shift from question 6, where there were some negative feelings about the research project midway through the experience, and a totally positive response at the end of the project, where all students felt either confident or happy. Even student N, although I believe he was actually happy that it was over. Now, using Kuhltau's model of the information search process, the effective elements identified from the use of the questionnaire reflects the growth of positive feelings from the beginning of the research project through the stages of initiation, selection, exploration, formulation, collection, presentation, and assessment. My final recommendations for future research projects with this group of learners or a different group are already underway as Term 4 moves along. They are listed here. Before beginning the unit of work, teach the students how to perform a proper search. Have a class brainstorm so the shared knowledge will be available to more students, who can then become peer tutors for those that find it difficult. Identify what a question is and the different levels of questions. Know the answer you need before you start. When administering questionnaires, clarify what is being asked so responses can be more relevant. Set aside more time than 3 weeks to achieve your goals. The younger the age group, the more time is needed. Keep the topic narrow. And finally, scaffold, 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 scaffold.